So let's turn our attention to why we're here, making money. And the only way you're going to make money is if you eventually harvest your profits. Once you've caught this big winner and you're pyramided in, you have this great big position, it's been running, at some point you're going to have to get out. And this is what we're going to discuss here. However, to stay aligned with our goals, there's really two types of selling, which I alluded to earlier. There's what I call shaper sells and tactical sells. So the reason I differentiate between the two of them is not every stock is going to become a monster winner. I wish it was that easy. It just simply isn't. So when you do catch a monster stock, a shaper sell signal is so powerful that you have to acknowledge that it's very possible that you're at the end of the trend and that the accumulation phase of that stock is over. And so that's really a signal when you see you want to exit even after you have tremendous gains and you have to move back to the sidelines. A tactical sell is essentially just harvesting profit and controlling risk if a stock is not performing as a leader. The real key to knowing when to use either of these two is going to come up in the holding section, which we're going to discuss. And essentially the holding criteria kind of flips that switch between saying, okay, we have to use shaper sells instead of tactical sells. It's really going to become clear as we move along, but that's really going to help to explain when you have to know which one to use. But first, I think it's best if we discuss the different ways to exit a stock. Of the shaper and the tactical sells, I further break these down into two different categories. There's always offensive and defensive. Basically, you almost always want to be selling offensively. It's ideal. It's usually when a stock is overextended to the upside. There's a lot of euphoria. And I mean, that overextension and euphoria applies both on a short-term basis and a long-term basis. So even if it's a tactical sell and you're harvesting short-term profits, it's always nicer to sell on the upside. You know, the saying in the market, it's the stairs up and elevator down. It's really true. So you can have all these gains building in over weeks, months, and then bang, some bad news comes out or the market trend turns and just so much of the profit is gone so quickly that by the time you exit, it's just such a real shame that you gave up so much of your profits before you realized there was a problem. So ideally, you want to be selling into strength as often as possible when the condition allows. However, you don't always get that indication. And that's why we have those defensive sells. Basically, the stock breaks lower and you have to find out a little bit later that the trend is ending, or at least there's an indication that the trend is ending and you have to exit anyways. So it's really important that we have two different ways of exiting a stock because you never really know what the market's going to throw at you. So we're going to take a look now at some shaper sells, but some of the criteria of these shaper sells include base count. So we're going to go back and take a quick look at the accumulation phase of a stock, which we looked at with Netflix earlier on. So base count becomes a little bit clearer to you. And once we understand that key criteria, we're going to move on to looking at all the different shaper sell signals. So the concept of base count, again, comes from William O'Neill. And in fact, a lot of the shaper sells are from the teachings of William O'Neill. And they're so critical. Just as the shaper buys really show that this trend is shaping to the upside, these shaper sells are showing that this trend is going to shape to the downside. And a key component is base count. So I would also recommend that you read Stan Weinstein's book for more information on the different phases of a stock. But it's important that you understand this base count. So once you have your first basing structure, once you advance by more than 20%, the next basing structure would be base 2. Here, for example, we had a quick rally, but it wasn't sufficiently large. So this is considered a base on base. So although it advanced somewhat, it's still close enough to the prior base structure within 20% that it's considered one basing structure. This is all base 2. As we advance further, we get to a base 3. Here we advance to base 4, and we finally find a sell signal. Now, William O'Neill always says the best money comes from bases 1 and 2, and the reason is the stock is not obvious to everybody yet. Usually base 1 comes, the stock is unknown, or we're coming out of a bear market where people are fearful. And so usually base 1s have a higher success rate. Saying base 2 is still relatively early in trend. By the time you get to base 3 and base 4, it's fairly obvious that the stock is trending strongly. It's on everybody's radar. The volatility tends to pick up, and it just becomes harder money. It doesn't mean they can't work, but it's harder money. Your success probability will fall, and the chances for just mediocre gains only to fall lower is much higher. So when we talk about base count, keep this in mind because whether you're early on in the basing structure or later on in the basing structure will affect how aggressive you should be in selling. So essentially, the earlier you are in the basing structure, the more you should be patient. And as we advance in trend, the more aggressive you should be to harvesting your profits.